struggle that it puts its roots out, isn't it? And grows strong. And our lives are exactly the same. So for Nichiren Daishonin, of course, in his times, long ago, this is 711 years ago that this Gosho was written, the Buddha, so far as he was concerned, was Shakyamuni. And the teaching was the Lotus Sutra. And the practice was to live the Lotus Sutra. Today, so far as we're concerned, the Buddha is Nichiren Daishonin, and the teaching is Nam-myoho Renge Kyo and the Gohonzon. And the practice is Daimoku, and Gongyo, Shakabuku, and study. So this also is the perfect practice of balance that enables us to find the middle way, the way of perfect balance, and weave our way through every obstacle and persecution that may afflict us. The title of this Gosho, we put up there, in Japanese is Nyo Setsu Shugosho. Nyo Setsu. Nyo, thus, Setsu, Buddha's teaching, Shugyo, practice. This means practicing the teachings which caused the Buddha to attain enlightenment. That's what this really means. In other words, if we practice the teachings exactly as the Buddha practiced them, then we too will attain enlightenment. That is the whole meaning of this Gosho. So we've talked a lot now about obstacles and difficulties, and it's necessary, I think, at this point to clearly understand that these obstacles and difficulties that we encounter through our strong practice and determination, although of course we say in a general sense that this is due to the workings of the negative and destructive force of life resisting the great challenging positive force which one's generating through the practice, it's also important to understand that these obstacles and difficulties arise from our karma. So in the Sado Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin said it's very difficult to distinguish between Sansho Shima and karma. Because Sansho Shima, the negative, destructive force of life, uses one's karma in order to try to hinder our practice. So the thing to remember there is that whatever difficulties or obstacles one faces, we created them, didn't we? We made the causes in this lifetime or in previous lifetimes in terms of eternal life. We made the causes for these effects that appear in our lives now. In other words, if we made the causes and created those effects, we can also overcome them. In that sense, you could say one's karma, the obstacles and difficulties that arise, are tailor-made for us. Perfect for me, perfect for you. Perfect, why? Perfect to help us grow. That's the wonder of the Buddhist teaching, isn't it? Whatever obstacle or difficulty, it's perfect for you. Perfect to enable one to grow and become strong. And furthermore, those obstacles and difficulties will not appear until the power of your faith and practice is strong enough to lift them out of your life onto the surface and, of course, overcome them. This is known as the principle of the four powers. That is, the power of your faith and the power of your practice activates the power of the Buddha and the power of the law. So you activate that strong power. The stronger you activate it, the more gradually you lift your karma out, but it's always in exact relationship with your power to overcome. So truly, all this is so that human beings can become strong. So this, of course, was the Buddha's enlightenment, that sufferings are an innate part of life. Why are they an innate part of life? Because only through battling with those sufferings, fighting one's way through, can a human being become strong and really valuable to life itself, to achieving our true purpose, in other words, in this world. So this is why Nichiren Daishonin says constantly there's nothing to fear, or he says, why should you be surprised by it? Or he says, there is nothing that you can't overcome. So this comes under the heading of a great principle, which is actually before your eyes on this Gehonzen every day you chant to it, which in Japanese is called Shoji Soku Nehan. Shoji Soku Nehan. Transforming the sufferings of life and death into enlightenment. Everything that we've been talking about for the last hour concerns that principle. This on the Gehonzen is represented on the right-hand side by the Sanskrit character, which looks rather like a pin man, a long pin man. You see the one I mean? Over on this side, halfway down on the right-hand side. That is Fudo. Fudo. Fudo means immovable. Nothing can destroy your life if you like to live your life with that attitude. Incredible, isn't it? The greatness of Buddhism. So I said earlier, the whole practice of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism is practice for oneself and practice for others. Jigyo, in Japanese, means practice for yourself. Keta means practice for others. Through the power of this practice, practicing exactly as the Buddha taught, we find the great middle way, the way of perfect balance. And it is that way of perfect balance which enables us to find our way through every difficulty and obstacle that we meet. So we should never fear. We should, just as the Gosho says, summon up our courage and practice all the harder when we meet an obstacle, knowing that the Gehonzen, or the wisdom of one's Buddhahood, will find the middle way and guide us through what may seem mountainous, but actually we can, as it were, dissolve it through the wisdom flowing through our lives. Right, so we'll now have a look at the Gosho in a little bit more detail. So Fiona will read the first part we'll study.
It is now clear that those who are born in this land and believe in this sutra, when its propagation is undertaken in the latter day of the law, will suffer persecutions even more severe than those which occurred in the Buddha's lifetime. It is now clear that those who are born in this land and believe in this sutra, when its propagation is undertaken in the latter day of the law, will suffer persecutions even more severe than those which occurred in the Buddha's lifetime.
Well, we've really talked all about that already, haven't we? In a nutshell, if we like to sit in a corner and chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo in a whisper and never go out and never chant or challenge our lives to practice just for the sake of practicing, then of course nothing will happen to us. But if we practice and challenge our lives exactly as the Buddha taught, of course things will happen to us. But those things and obstacles that will arise will actually lead us and give us the power and the strength to Buddhahood. Because this is what this practice is saying, that you will attain Buddhahood, or indestructible happiness and value in your life in this lifetime. Nothing less. So this is what we are practicing for. So we practice for others, to make others happy, to make others able to develop Buddhahood in their lives. But in the end, it all comes back to our happiness, doesn't it? So in the Sado Gosho, in volume 1, Nichiren Daishonin describes what happens when you practice with quite a graphic example. I'll ask Fiona to read it.
Usually, these sufferings would torment a person over many lifetimes, appearing one at a time. But Nichiren has denounced the enemies of the Lotus Sutra so severely that all 8 descended upon him at once. His situation is like that of a peasant heavily in debt to his lord and others. As long as he remains on the estate, they are likely to defer his debts from one year to the next, rather than mercilessly hounding him. But as soon as he tries to leave, everyone will rush over and demand that he repay everything at once. Thus the sutra states, "It is due to the blessings obtained by protecting the law that one can diminish his suffering and retribution."
That passage has comforted me lots of times, and I'm sure many others of you in this room. So also in this first few lines, Nichiren Daishonin is referring to his conviction that the time is right for this teaching. That is to say, the age of Mappo, predicted by Shakyamuni 3,000 years ago, in which we now live. These 5 guides to propagation are shown on that small illustration over there. The bottom one: correct country, correct time, correct teaching, correct sequence, and correct capacity. So he says, it is now clear that those who are born in this land, there he's referring to the country. In our case, this country is ready, isn't it, for these teachings. There are huge numbers of people increasingly who are puzzling about life due to the difficulties they're facing, the difficulties this country is facing, and questioning the old established religious teachings and feeling that they need something that is more suitable for the times that we live in. The very fact that we all here embrace the Gonzen is proof of that. And the very fact that more and more people are embracing the Gonzen every month, every year, to an increasing degree. So the time is right, isn't it? How can we doubt that in the least in this country? Especially too with the difficult problems that are arising, such as unemployment and so on. And then it says, and believe in this sutra. That is to say, the people are capable of believing in the Gohonzon, capable of believing that it is possible for them to attain Buddhahood. This is obviously very important. Have people the intellectual capacity to grasp the teachings and to believe that they can attain Buddhahood. 3,000 years ago, the people of those times when Shakyamuni taught would never have believed that they could have become the same as Shakyamuni. In those times, it was a feudal system. It was just people who were highly educated, a few of them at the top, monks, priests, and everyone else living simple lives as peasants. They couldn't believe that they could ever attain Buddhahood. They could ever attain the same state of life as they saw in Shakyamuni Buddha, who was a prince and a very charismatic character. But today, you could say we've got much bigger heads. It is possible now, in this age, for us to begin to believe that we could attain Buddhahood. And Nichiren Daishonin constantly, in so many Gosho, is saying that to us. You are a true Buddha, he says. And this is what we can attain through this practice. So the people's capacity must be correct or adequate. And secondly, he says this sutra, that is to say, the teaching, this sutra, which in this age of Mappo means the Gohonzon and Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This is suitable to give and powerful enough to give people benefit and to prove its and validate itself against teachings which preceded it. And then he says, the latter day of the law. This is the time, Mappo. And finally, persecutions even more severe. In other words, this teaching is superior to previous teachings, and therefore the negative and destructive force of life gets to work even harder to prevent it from spreading. So these are the 5 guides which Nichiren Daishonin advocated in considering whether or not this teaching was correct for these times. So really everything's in perfect condition in the UK for this. We made our target, I'm happy to say, in what we call the first wave. We made the increase needed. And if we made the increase again exactly as we wish, we shall end this year, or rather we shall end 1985 with more than 3,000 members, which is what we so much want to do. So therefore, why should we doubt that we won't reach 10,000 members in 1990? And why should we doubt that we don't have 1 million members at the beginning of the 21st century? Of course we will, because the time is right. And because we see that it's right now in what is happening around us. Why should we doubt? Why should we want to hide the fact that we're Buddhists or feel shy about talking about it? This Buddhism is fascinating to people. Of course, sometimes we may find people against it. That's inevitable. That's their karma, isn't it? But mostly people find it so interesting. So again, Nichiren Daishonin clearly predicted we would encounter, of course, from individuals, misunderstanding and opposition sometimes. But at the same time, there are others who are just yearning and waiting to hear it. So we have nothing to fear. This is why, when Polly Toynbee wrote her article, I felt thrilled. This was the first time we'd excited the 3 powerful enemies. What are the 3 powerful enemies? Firstly, people of influence in society who, through ignorance of Buddhism, attack it. So such people in this modern age are journalists, or people who are working in the media. The second of the 3 powerful enemies is ignorant priests of other religions who, misunderstanding Buddhism, attack it. And the third one is the authorities, the ruling authorities, who, stirred up by one means or another, and through ignorance again of Buddhism, the movement for Causton Rufu, turn against it. So we have to become strong to invite the 3 powerful enemies. But I'm glad to say that we just got a glimpse of them recently. So it means that we're really growing, which is wonderful. Right, Fiona, on we go to the next part.
In that age, the Master was a Buddha, and his disciples were great bodhisattvas and arhats. Moreover, the Buddha expounded the Lotus Sutra only after he had thoroughly taught and trained everyone who was to hear it, including the gods, humans both lay and ordained, and the 8 kinds of lowly beings. Still some of his followers rejected it. Now in the latter day of the law, even though the teaching, the people's capacity, and the time for propagation are in accord, we must expect all the more hostility, for this is the age of conflict in which the pure law has been lost. Moreover, the teacher is but a common person, and his disciples come from among impious men defiled by the 3 poisons. For this reason, people reject the virtuous teacher and seek out evil priests instead.
So Nichiren Daishonin is referring here, of course, to the difference of the 2 times, Shakyamuni's times and his own times. And as you know, in Shakyamuni's day, the people who were able to practice Buddhism properly were very, very few, because it was an extremely complicated and lengthy practice, and people had to devote their lives to it. Therefore, the people who practiced Buddhism in his day were either very rich people who had plenty of leisure, or they were monks and priests who gave their lives to practice. It couldn't be practiced by the ordinary people. The ordinary people just benefited because those in power in the land were practicing it. So that Buddhism, the Buddhism of Shakyamuni, is known as the Buddhism of the harvest. That is to say, over many eons of lifetimes, those disciples and followers of his had practiced his teachings and gradually brought themselves to the point where they could be born with him in this world and attain Buddhahood. Whereas the Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin is known as the Buddhism of the sowing. That is to say, the seed of this Buddhism is sown in one in this lifetime, and in that one lifetime the tree of Buddhahood can grow and blossom. So, two different ages. This is the important point to understand. Why, people say, should there have been those two sorts of Buddhism? Because there are two sorts of ages. Shakyamuni said the age of Mappo would be chaotic and disastrous, and that human beings would suffer so terribly. The world is older. It's entered its eons of decline, according to Buddhist wisdom. Therefore, unless life force is generated strongly by human beings, so far as this planet is concerned, that degeneration of this planet will accelerate the older it gets, until the planet becomes useless as a functioning organism in the universe as a whole. So even in the cell in our body, we know they revive themselves or replace themselves every 7 years. What keeps those cells functioning fabulously and efficiently, even though they're getting so old like me? Nothing else but life force. So even in a cell of your body there is a catalyst which, once it passes into the stage of middle age and old age, keeps it functioning vibrantly, even though physically it's getting old and decaying. You understand? Then at some point that cell dies and immediately replaces itself. So it's the same with this planet. The planet has to function efficiently and vibrantly, even though it's beginning to get old. Of course, getting old takes billions of years. But the older it gets physically, the more vital is life force to keep it ticking and fulfilling its function in the universe. So this is why in this age of Mappo is the beginning of that time of decline. This is why Shakyamuni Buddha said the age of Mappo will go on for 10,000 years into eternity. This is why more and more and more people must be chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo if Kosen Rufu is going to be achieved and stability and balance maintained in this earth until it finally, in billions of years' time, explodes and disappears into the universe. So that is the reason for the Buddhism of the harvest and the Buddhism of the sowing. Different times. And we promised, so the Lotus Sutra says 3,000 years ago, we promised to appear now and seek the Gohonzon and Shakabuku other people as bodhisattvas of the earth. So in the ceremony of the air, for those of you who don't know, in that ceremony, which was an allegory in which Shakyamuni Buddha predicted the transmission of the true law in the age we're living in now, he predicted that these bodhisattvas would appear out of the earth, out of the mud and slush of ordinary life, just like me, just like you, and that you would appear and act as votaries of the Lotus Sutra, that you would teach Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and the Gohonzon to others. So in those days, 3,000 years ago, in that allegory, Shakyamuni explains how his disciples, so much his disciples in those days, wanted to do this great thing, appearing in the age of Mappo and teaching others. And he said, no, you'll never do it. You're not strong enough. And they were bitterly disappointed. He said, these are the people that would teach the law in the age of Mappa. And all these tens of thousands of people rose out of the ground. That's us. So below the surface of being a mother or a career woman, being a wife, living in wherever it may be we're living, below the surface all that, our purpose is as bodhisattvas of the earth. And what is more, however much we try to be blind to the fact, we will never be happy unless we're practicing exactly as the Buddha taught. Because that is our whole purpose for appearing in this world. So let's get on with it. That's the answer, isn't it?
What is more, once you become a follower of the Lotus Sutra's true votary, whose practice accords with the Buddha's teachings, you are bound to face the three powerful enemies. Therefore, from the very day you take faith in this teaching, you should be fully prepared to face the three kinds of persecutions, which are certain to be more terrible now after the Buddha's passing. Although my disciples had already heard this, some became so terrified when both great and small persecutions confronted us that they even forsook their faith. Did I not warn you in advance? I have been teaching you day and night directly from the sutra which says, since hatred and jealousy abound even during the lifetime of the Buddha, how much worse will it be in the world after his passing? You have no reason to be suddenly frightened when you witness me driven from my home, wounded or officially censured and exiled, this time to a distant province.
Thank you. When the first president of the Soka Gakkai, Mr. Makiguchi, was imprisoned in World War II, or the beginning of World War II, there were 25 leaders of the lay society imprisoned with him, and it completely destroyed the movement for Kosen Rufu as it had reached at that time. That is to say, most people went taiten, including the 25 leaders who were imprisoned. Some continued, of course, to practice underground, but in great fear. Whatever happens, it was the nearest thing to the law, the true law of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo disappearing into darkness that one could possibly imagine. This is why Mr. Toda had that burning passion when he came out of prison, that he would build the size of the Soka Gakkai so strongly and so rapidly that never again would there be such a likelihood of the true law being lost. So why did they go taiten? Mr. Toda said, definitely it was because in those days the Gosho were not easily to hand. There was no volume of Gosho available to the lay people pre-World War II. Therefore, Mr. Toda's first and main task, having announced his target for Shakabuku, to make the Gakkai strong, to protect the head temple and the law, his next step was to gather together the Gosho, and with the advice of a retired high priest, to prepare that volume which exists, of course, to today, and which is treasure, isn't it? And Mr. Toda said it was because of this, because the Gosho were not available, because study wasn't available to the members of those early days before World War II. Therefore, they couldn't understand why the votary of the Lotus Sutra of those times, who was Mr. Makiguchi, the main one, was imprisoned and persecuted. He was imprisoned and persecuted, as you know, because he refused to allow the military government of those times to incorporate Shintoism, and particular emperor worship, in the Buddhist teachings, which other sects did permit. But this is an important point, isn't it? Study is very important. So I'm sure you came into NSUK, and many people, your district leaders and so on, have said to you, study is important. Study is important. And I hope, today we're really understanding that. And I hope in the future, too, you'll go on saying to new members, people who've just come to the practice, study is important. Study is a vital support to the other two practices of Gongyo and Daimoku and Shakabuku. Practice for oneself, practice for others. Why? Because of this, this, and this, and it's all available in the Gosho. So let's always keep that in our hearts. We have to prepare ourselves and our newer members to face the obstacles which they're bound to encounter in the future. It's very important to deeply understand the reason for that and never to be surprised by it. This is why studying Nichiren Daishonin's life is so incredibly important. So in this respect, there is a famous passage from the Kaimoku Sho, from the opening of the eyes, which I'll ask Fiona to read, because this is the passage that really should live in us. And I might say that at the end of the men's division course, those 100 valiant men, and I can promise you they were great, they recited these lines together. So convinced were they that this is the way they must be in the future.
Although I and my disciples may encounter various difficulties, if we do not harbor doubt in our hearts, we will, as a matter of course, attain Buddhahood. Do not have doubts simply because heaven does not lend you protection. Do not be discouraged because you do not enjoy an easy and secure existence in this life. This is what I have taught my disciples morning and evening, and yet they begin to harbor doubts and abandon their faith. Foolish men are likely to forget the promises they have made when the crucial moment comes.
So this is truly our task, isn't it? The battle between the Buddha and the devil. And we only have to look just outside our back door or our front door, and we can see exactly why we're doing it.
That's in volume 2, page 205.
So really, that has to be our spirit, I believe. Right, let's go on.
Question. The votary who practices according to the Buddha's teachings should live a peaceful life in this world. Why then are you beset by the three powerful enemies?
So here Nichiren Daishonin is anticipating those doubts of ours, isn't he? Why should the votary of the Lotus Sutra have to suffer? But we've already answered that one, so that we can grow. Okay?
Answer. Shakyamuni faced the 9 great persecutions for the sake of the Lotus Sutra. In the distant past, Bodhisattva Fukyo was attacked with sticks and stones. Chu Tao Sheng was exiled to Mount Su. Priest Fa Tao was branded on the face, and Aryasena was beheaded. The great teacher Tiantai was opposed by the 7 northern and 3 southern sects, and the great teacher Dengyo was vilified by the 6 sects in the old capital of Nara. The Buddha and these bodhisattvas and great saints were all votaries of the Lotus Sutra, yet they suffered great persecutions. If you deny that they practiced according to the Buddha's teachings, then where can you find those who did? This is the age of conflict in which the pure law has been lost. Moreover, in this evil country, the ruler, his ministers, and even the general public are without exception tainted by slander. They have opposed the true teaching and revered heretical doctrines and priests instead. Therefore, demons have invaded the land furiously, causing the 3 calamities and 7 disasters to strike again and again.
Therefore, demons have invaded the land furiously. In other words, if the people are negative, then so the forces of the universe will turn away and act negatively and destructively as well. This is nothing else but Esho Funi, isn't it? The inseparability of us and everything that surrounds us. If we are positive, if we are creating value, trying every day to do something valuable in our lives, creating this positive power in the world, then all the Buddhist gods, that say all the forces of the universe, will be protecting us and acting positively towards the development of the happiness of those three realms that surround us, the realm of ourselves, the realm of society, and the realm of the land. We can see how the Buddhist gods work ourselves. A simple example, if you go into the sun and you lie in it too long because your wisdom isn't working that day, the sun can destroy your skin. If you go into a desert and your wisdom isn't working and you don't take enough petrol or water with you, you'll kill yourself. The sun will kill you. I mean, that's a simple example of the way the forces of the universe work. But if your whole life is working positively and valuably, they will work with you too. So what is the significance of the first prayer of Gongyo in the mornings? We are feeding the Buddhist gods. We're not imploring them to protect us. We're feeding them with our life force. You understand? That is the significance of that first prayer. So every day, please feed them with your determination and your daimoku. And then, a little bit further, Nichiren Daishonin says, this indeed is an accursed time to live in this land. It may seem accursed, but on the other hand, it's Mappo. Dengyo the Great, it's recorded, said, oh, to be born in the age of Mappo. Because he was born just before it. And he didn't have that. All he could see was the theory of it. He knew that when this age began, then the bodhisattvas would appear and really begin this amazing movement called Causton Rufu. And Dengyo wanted to be part of it, but he had another mission to fulfill. So this is, of course, the significance of SGI. Soka Gakkai International is the organization of the bodhisattvas of the earth throughout the world. This absolutely unprecedented movement of ordinary human beings who are really working in unity together towards peace. And most important of all, chanting daimoku to change this world and doing shakubuku so more and more people are there to create this change quicker and quicker. So we're not here as a religious movement to, as I said yesterday, take part in demonstrations and that sort of thing. Maybe at some point we may have to demonstrate, or we may have to get a petition for something or whatever. But our main task is shakubuku and daimoku, to give us the power to change this land. This is our main task, and we must be very careful not to waste our energies on anything which could prejudice that main task. So this is indeed an accursed time to live in this land. But speaking personally, I feel, I can echo Dengyo the Great's remarks. Oh, how fortunate I am to be born in this age of Mappo. And then Nichiren Daishonin goes on to give his vow. You just read it.
This is indeed an accursed time to live in this land. However, the Buddha has commanded me to be born in this age, and it would be impossible to go against his decree. And so I have put complete faith in the sutra and launched the battle of the provisional and true teaching. Donning the armor of endurance and girding myself with the sword of the true teaching, I have raised the banner of Myoho Renge Kyo, the essence of the entire 8 volumes of the Lotus Sutra. Then drawing the bow of the Buddha's declaration, I have not yet revealed the truth, and notching the arrow of honestly discarding the provisional teachings, I have mounted the cart drawn by the great white ox and battered down the gates of the provisional teachings. Attacking first one and then another, I have refuted the Nembutsu, Shingon, Zen, Ritsu, and other sects. Some of my adversaries have fled headlong, while others have retreated, and still others have been captured to become my disciples. I continue to repulse their attacks and defeat them. But there are legions of enemies opposing the single king of the law and the handful who follow him. So the battle goes on even today.
So the battle with us, of course, is not against provisional Buddhist teachings, but it's against what one could describe as incomplete and at times erroneous teachings, erroneous religious teachings which have brought Europe to virtually more than 1,000 years of war and slaughter and bloodshed. Teachings which have seen priests of both sides in war inspiring the men to actually fight each other in some cause. Teachings which were incomplete. And because of that incompleteness, created wars about the true solutions and the true answers to various questions of dogma and doctrine. We have to face this fact. This is the history of our continent. So this is the battle that we're involved in here. And then Nichiren Daishonin says he dons the armor of endurance. There's just one short passage from the Kaimokusho, the opening of the eyes, which gives his spirit in that respect.
Here I will make a great vow. Though I might be offered the rulership of Japan if I will only abandon the Lotus Sutra, accept the teachings of the Kamiryoju Sutra, and look forward to rebirth in the Western Pure Land, though I might be told that my father and mother will have their heads cut off if I do not recite the Nembutsu, whatever obstacles I might encounter, so long as men of wisdom do not prove my teachings to be false, I will never accept the practices of the other sects. All other troubles are no more to me than dust before the wind. I will be the pillar of Japan. I will be the eyes of Japan. I will be the great ship of Japan. This is my vow, and I will never forsake it.
So he and enables us to see our true selves and gives us the principle of Juji Soku Kanjin. That is to say, we can receive the Gohonzon, we embrace it with the practice, and through that, Kanjin occurs. We begin in a very natural way to see our life, to see the reality of our life, and to desire to change those things that disappoint us, and to develop what we see which pleases us, which is Buddhahood. And then he goes on to explain that he raises the banner of that teaching, Myoho Renge Kyo, and he draws the bow and notches the arrow. That is Shakabuku. A bow without an arrow is useless, and the arrow goes very direct, doesn't it? Straight to the heart, the truth that we can teach others. And he mounts the cart with the great white ox, which I mentioned yesterday. That is to say, the Daigo Honzon and the cart which leads one to Buddhahood. And then he ends by saying, so the battle goes on even today. So 711 years later, we can say the same. So the battle goes on even today. And as a matter of fact, even when Kosen Rufu is achieved, that is to say, that the destructive and negative slide or tilt in this world is rectified to something positive and valuable, still the negative force is always at work, always waiting to come in the moment one weakens. So the battle will go on today for all eternity, for the bodhisattvas of the earth. So always we and our successors will be occupied with this incredible great task. But through it, we fight and overcome our problems and become truly happy, valuable people. Thank you very much indeed for listening to a long lecture. Many thanks.